Well, I'm here with Ben Klutsey. Ben, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. Great to see you, Daniel.
Yeah, you too. Um, so could you just start by sharing a brief summary of what you do and how you came to be in the position that you're right now?
Wow. I'm the executive director of the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. Mercatus is a research center. Mercatus is Latin for markets. It means that we care a lot about markets and how markets advance innovation, human flourishing, prosperity, and so on. But ultimately, our logo is the bridge. And we like to think of ourselves as the bridge between the world of academia and real world problems. And in between that, how to get the ideas from academia to the real world is talent and individuals, scholars, public intellectuals. So our goal is to really train and equip these classical liberal change makers who can take ideas from academia to real world problems and help address those things.
Hmm.
Now, yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, continue. Yeah, keep
Yeah,
going.
no, so I you know, studied at George Mason University, for grad school. While I was there, I learned a lot about Mercatus and what it is. And a lot of the things that I learned, especially in my economics courses, did align with a lot of things that I had, seen and grown up with. I'm originally from Ghana, West Africa. And growing up, I saw a lot of poverty around me. And one of the questions that I was really curious about was the quintessential Adam Smith question: how do nations make wealth? And, I grew up at a time when there was a lot of turmoil in Ghana. We had seen, coups. In fact, I think throughout the entire time I lived and grew up in Ghana, I had only known one president. He came in as a military officer and military ruler, eventually ran for office and won 2 times, but I'd only known one president. And during the Marxist revolution in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a lot of turmoil in the country. And my father, who was an entrepreneur, was one who was harassed and, pushed around and almost thrown in jail for the sole reason of being an entrepreneur. And I saw what that did to the country. I saw, companies seized and restrictions on trade and markets and things like that. The country faced a huge famine in 1983. And that constraint of ideas, constraint of entrepreneurship and businesses eventually was lifted because the leaders saw that it was not working. And when that was changed. They began to introduce market liberalization, state-owned companies from fisheries to telecom to mango processing, and a whole host of things were privatized. We began to see the economy begin to emerge. So I'd seen that, and it really resonated with me. But when I came to the United States and studied and learned about markets and freedom and equality and all these things just really make me realize how much we need to understand what makes societies flourish. And so that's what really got me interested in markets and freedom and prosperity, all those things, which got me connected to the Mercator Center.
So you've done some work. You started a really cool documentary called Undivided a couple years ago, and I know that you've been really involved in the what they might call the bridging space.
Hmm.
Which we both are a part of, as coming from more in common. This idea that we're trying to figure out what people's commonalities are and what can bring them together. So,
Yeah.
I'm wondering, how are you feeling about the state of polarization in America today?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there is certainly polarization, right? I mean, and the literature even better than I do that, there is political polarization, and America has always been polarized in that sense that, on policies, right, related to the Second Amendment or immigration or pro-choice, pro-life, And those arguments have been sort of perennial arguments we've had time and again. What we're seeing now is affective polarization, that sort of how we feel about each other is changing and, worsening in certain contexts. And so, I think that especially in the context of a politics that is very charged, and the kinds of tough arguments that have been made, competing for ideas, going all the way back from, COVID or even before that, to what we have now. So things are quite tense. But my sense is that, and especially going through the Undivide Us experience, is that when we come together and we actually have good conversations with each other, we tend to realize that we are overestimating how extreme the other side is. And the reason that's happening is because we've been sorted into various geographic and virtual spaces for a long time. We're not engaging people who are different from us. And that is, I think, um, sort of making the sort of polarization worse. But I'm an optimist, so I tend to see that there are opportunities for us to bridge those divides if we can engage each other a lot more.
Mm. And so what do you think is the secret? Do you think the secret is bringing people together and hashing it out, having that tough conversation? Or are there other things that can be done to kind of help heal these wounds?
Yeah, I mean, there's that's one thing. There's some research that shows that these things don't stick, right, if they're not done consistently. Some of the research on meta perceptions show that if you show in real time, so for example, this was done by, he's at Northwestern University, Nork Tiley. I'm sure you're familiar with him,
Yeah.
but some of the stuff that he's done has been really, really interesting. Like they would ask, Democrats what they think Republicans would do in this context if they would allow vaccines to be released, a few weeks before, the 2020 election, and they knew that that would have helped Donald Trump. Would they go for it, right? And about 90% of, I'm forgetting the exact numbers, but let's say 90% of Democrats say by all means, Republicans are going to say yes. And you ask Republicans in real time, and it's only like 5% of them that say yes, right? And you
Mm-hmm.
show them the results in real time, and they're all surprised, like, wait a second, I totally misunderstood, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you do the same thing on the other side where you ask Republicans, whether you think that Democrats are open borders, they don't want any restrictions whatsoever on immigration, and they say like 90%. And then you ask Democrats in real time, and they have a lot more of a nuanced view about immigration. Well, we think there should be some controls, there should be this and that. And you show them the results in real time, and they're surprised by that. And that goes to the earlier point I made about we are sort of overestimating how extreme the other side is, but we've got to show it to each other, right? And when you show those results, apparently those help. They have some lasting effects for several weeks or so, but then you gotta have to continue these things across the board. I think our social media spaces are, cable news spaces, like all the places that we absorb information, have to reflect some of these nuances and how people think about each other. The other side, the other thing is just leadership. And I think it's um, we underestimate how powerful certain leaders in our society can inspire people towards more unity, right, versus division. And from the local to the state level to the federal levels, we need leaders who are sort of inspiring people towards that. And I think when we look across our history, we've seen, presidents and leaders who have done that. And sometimes the issues are difficult to really, unite people. But that's one piece. So we need that piece. But I think the other piece is just individuals talking to each other, engaging with one another, and helping us see that, hey, there's more to each other than just politics. And as you know, negative attitudes towards inter-party marriages is higher than like interfaith, interracial, and so on. And that's wild. It means that our political identities have taken on a completely new identity than it was before. And so we have to figure out how to unpack that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's essentially now the one thing you learn. You could learn everything you know about a person, and then you find out whether they're Republican, and you're like, "Oh, okay, it totally changes the vibe,"
Right, right,
or
right.
vice versa, right?
Yeah. It's this
Yeah,
overarching identity. Like you think you know everything about them once you learn about their party. It's
that's right.
unfortunate.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. There's these images I have of you. So in that movie, Undivide Us, like these images of you sitting at the table with people who are actually engaged in these conversations. I'm wondering, in those personal experiences that you've had, or also in your personal life as you're navigating, you know, to, also just to tack on another sort of level here, you know. I think that our More in Commons research has shown that maybe something like 80 or 90% of people who are African or African American voted for Democrats. So I wonder if do people make assumptions about your particular point of view and how you navigate those types of situations?
Yeah, I try to avoid politics altogether. So
Yeah,
I tend not to get involved in those. But yeah, it's the data is the data, right? In those conversations on Dividus, it was interesting because there were a lot of assumptions that people made about each other
yeah,
coming in, and then they start having the conversations. And when you're sitting next to somebody, you tend to calibrate sort of because you're very charitable. You're experiencing their humanity right in front of you. And one of the things we say is, look into their faces, use their names. Um,
mm,
and when I run the Pluralist Labs, I ask, there are three principles that we talk about. It's respect, authenticity, and curiosity. Respect the idea that we're one another's dignified equals. And so if we're going to share this space, we're going to respect each other. That's what a democracy is,
mm,
self-governing equals. If we can agree on that, then we can move to the next principle, which is authenticity. We're not masking our views. We're not pretending to be something we're not, but we're going to be really true to our principles and our views because we're ultimately not trying to change each other's minds. And then finally, curiosity. The only way we can learn about what's going on and with each other is when we can ask questions, right? And as Monica Guzman would say, you want to get a place in the conversation where you say, oh, I never thought of it that way. It doesn't mean that you agree with them, but it just means that you see how they're connecting the dots, right? So once those principles are laid out and respect, authenticity, and curiosity, you find that there are just so many opportunities for people to engage respectfully. Now, there are some tense moments in those conversations where people are very, very emotional about some of the
mm,
topics being discussed. But ultimately, you'll see the respect, the authenticity, and the curiosity. And so it's really, really interesting to see. Yes, people make assumptions about others based on their, what they look like or, where they're from. But they learn very quickly that, wait a second, there was a really interesting part about the discussion where, Felicia, an African American in Pittsburgh,
yeah,
and another, guy, he's white and he's in Pittsburgh as well. And he's assuming that he had actually made some really good assumptions, right? That the reason you're probably against the Second Amendment because you've seen a lot of, deaths in your community because of, people just grabbing a gun and shooting somebody. And, uh, you know, and she's like, well, that's true, but I own a gun, right? I have a gun. I own a gun. I believe in that I need to protect myself when somebody comes in, blah, blah. And that was something that I realized that the folks around the table um, uh, didn't think would be the case, right? And so it's just, yeah, we have all kinds of assumptions that we make about people. And once we get to talking, we realize, oh my gosh, there's so many different levels and depths to people that it's actually exciting to explore.
Yeah, I love that too. Those moments where you have some sort of expectation about a person, and then
Mhm.
you have that moment where you're like, oh, wait,
Yeah,
and that, and it's a little bit like you're saying, like, I never thought about it that way, but it's that, I think the world needs more of those moments of disconfirmation of hypotheses, right?
for
Where
sure.
we have some sort of hypothesis, some expectation about the way the world is or should be, or about a person, and then those expectations, there's that moment where, and those are the moments that sort of wake us up. They
Uh-huh.
wake us up out of our routine, out of our monotonous, kind of going through the motions almost,
Yeah,
and they make us realize that, yeah, maybe our little map of the world, maybe our picture of reality isn't quite maybe I got to rethink some stuff. I think that those are just so important.
for sure. And I think the more we do that, the more we realize that we will often be wrong if we assume too much about, others. And I think that probably helps to soften our tensions a little bit, right? I mean, Kevin Valier, in his book Trust in a Polarized Age, talks about the decline in social trust across the United States, and that across Western democracies, I think the US has seen the steepest decline in social trust. And it is largely due to this kind of polarization, but it's because we are so siloed in our own echo chambers. And I think that if we want to build back social trust, we've got to have these conversations. Yeah.
Yeah, and got to be wrong sometimes. Be ready to
Got
be
to be wrong.
wrong, right?
It's totally fine to be wrong. You'll be corrected for sure.
Yeah.
Uh,
Um, so you said you're an optimistic guy, which I am also an optimistic guy. What's giving you hope these days?
I think that at a time when people are concerned about American institutions, I think you also see that American institutions are robust. They're being tested. I mean, there's no doubt that American institutions are being tested, but I think that you can never know that something is strong or robust unless it's tested. And so I think this is an interesting period for us to just witness. That gives me hope. I think that looking at the number of organizations that are getting involved in sort of the bridging space, as you indicated, civil discourse, and we did the documentary, and there's a lot going on. There's a lot of desire for Americans to really, connect with one another. And I'm, it's encouraging to me to see that. And I mentioned Monica Guzman's book. I never thought of it that way, but
Yeah, who I'll
it,
be speaking with in December, actually. So,
oh, fantastic!
for
Yes,
those who on the podcast who want to check it out,
yeah,
come see her in December.
for sure, for
Little plug
sure.
there. Thanks,
Yeah, no,
thanks for
no.
the product placement, Ben.
Of course, no, she's wonderful. And
Yeah,
one of the
she
things
is.
she talks about, I don't want to spoil things for your listeners here, but
Yeah.
um, you know, she takes a bus load of her friends in um, Washington State, right? Her county voted 73% for Hillary Clinton in 2016, and they go to a different part of the country. 73% of them voted for Donald Trump. That's a rural part of Oregon. And they spend the entire day talking and discovering and learning about each other. And it was an eye-opening moment. From what I understand, her experience was. And an older gentleman said to her that, for the very first time, I feel seen. And I think that we need to create these opportunities where we see each other. And as we are embarking on a lot of these, projects, some of these things are, you have the Beacon Project, which is great. But there are a number of projects out there to learn more about, our fellow Americans and fellow citizens. And we need to have this sort of civic resurgence. I think that's what does it, right? I think that politics is politics, right? And there are always, there will be what Amanda Ripley calls conflict entrepreneurs. who will emerge out of politics. We have to be aware, and we have to kind of filter, what they say. But we have some responsibilities, ourselves to try to learn more about each other. So that's what gives me hope.
Hmm.
And obviously, I find a lot of the young people that we work with to be curious about ideas and wanting to learn as much as possible. And they're not jaded. So that's good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah. I also think like it's really goes both ways, right? Because like it's seeing another person gives you a window onto their perspective, but feeling seen,
hmm
and feeling recognized and feeling respected and feeling
for
as though
sure.
you have that your the particular experiences and values that you're bringing to the table are if not agreed with but at least appreciated and recognized by another person can have a huge kind of softening effect
hmm
in both directions. So
Yeah,
I really appreciate you bringing that up.
yeah. And it reminds me that America is resilient, right? America is resilient, and we have to think about the things that make us resilient and keep doing those things.
Yeah.
So anyway,
um so Ben, I know you're a parent, you're a dad of four kids, is that right?
that's right. Yeah.
Four kids. How old are they?
13, 11, 8, and 3.
Good, you got it all. You got it
Oh
all.
yeah.
And no,
Oh yeah.
and no birthdays coming up.
Well, one just wrapped up in September. My
Okay,
7-year-old turned 8, so
nice.
yeah, he's crossed over. He's excited. There's one coming up in December,
Okay.
and then one in February. So there's always something. There's always something in the Klutsey
Yeah,
household. Yeah.
keeps you busy.
Oh yeah.
I wonder if, any of the things do you feel like there's any kind of crossover between any of the things that we've talked about in terms of um, you know, some of the themes that, any of the themes that we spoke about today. Do you feel like there's any way in which you bring some of those values into your approach to parenting?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I care a lot about my kids listening to one another and not just jumping to conclusions, not being too reactive, not being too harsh with one another. Obviously, I have a teenager, and then I have ones that are not, and so you can imagine how the younger ones will get on the nerves of the older one, and it happens, right? But one of the things that I think a lot about is virtues, and it's something that I realize there's a yearning for in this country. When I look at the kids across campuses who are protesting or those who are counter protesting and all of that, I find that there is a yearning for virtues. Now, in some ways, these different groups are over indexing a little bit, right? You have one group that's over indexing on justice because maybe they've been taught a particular kind of ethics and virtues, right? So they over-index on that. And there's a group that is maybe over-indexing on patriotism and all of these things, right? And I think that you really have to develop virtues in a balanced way, right? If you think about the classical virtues of, prudence, justice, courage, temperance, there is a sense that all of these things have to be um, developed, what Aristotle called the golden mean, right? There needs to be a balancing of all these virtues. And I spent a lot of time talking to my kids about, what it's like to develop these virtues. And I was reading Jeff Rosen's book, The Pursuit of Happiness, about the founders and how much they spent time thinking about virtues. And the Ben Franklins and the Thomas Jeffersons spent each day, they tried, as imperfect as they were, they tried to rank themselves. And they had the grit system. How well did I do on justice today? How well did I do on temperance today? On courage? Oh, I didn't do so well. I need to do better the next day. And on and on and on. But there was a deep concern about cultivating these virtues. And I think a lot of the work that we do in the bridging space, I think it's really about cultivating virtues, right? On pluralism and all these things I mentioned, respect, authenticity, and all this stuff. There's a sense of virtues cultivation that I think is really, really critical so we can live together and coexist peacefully even amidst deep divides and differences. And so, I'm a person of faith, and I spend a lot of time with my kids talking about, faith and, the fruit of the spirit, which is a sort of a biblical, New Testament thing. And so they list them, right? Joy, peace, happiness, and, self-control and this and that. And they list
Mm.
them, but then we talk about that. Like, how did you practice self-control today? And so at the dinner table, we do highs and lows, right? What were your highs and what were your lows and blah, blah. It's like, well, did you practice any of the virtues to help you, during your lows? And so it's a conversation that we're having constantly. And, my hope is that, they will learn. But it takes time.
Yeah, and it's lovely to think about the ways in which those types of lessons can also be applied in our current culture and society. I think that, you know, just keeping in mind some of those basic principles of respect and but it's more than that, right? Because
Hmm.
the challenge is not just keeping them in mind, but finding the right way to balance them, and
For sure.
I think that is in some ways it may not be that we have neglected or forgotten them, but that we're struggling to figure out the right way to balance them in a constantly shifting world where
Hmm.
actually sometimes in when the world is a certain way, the way to shift and improve that world is to apply a particular value or virtue to it because it needs a little bit more of that. And then
Yes.
maybe it goes in a different direction. And so we have to actually malleably adapt our
Hmm.
own sort of emphasis
Hmm.
on virtues in order to right the ship
Yeah.
in certain situations.
For sure. For sure. And, I'm a big fan of Joshua Chernis's book, Liberalism in Dark Times, where he talks about the concept of tempered liberalism. And, he's talking about an era, in the aftermath of World War I, World War II, where we saw all these, ideologies like fascism and Nazism, and there was a kind of ruthlessness with this anti-liberal ideologies. And he highlights figures like Isaiah Berlin, Albert Camus, and other, Max Weber and other thinkers and writers who themselves had to cultivate a kind of tempered liberalism, because we face something he calls a liberal predicament, that in the face of the ruthlessness and anti-liberalism, our instinct is to sort of fight fire with fire and push back in the same ways as they are doing. And that is sort of counterproductive, and you slide down to where they are, which you don't want.
Hmm.
And so if you really want to develop this sort of tempered, liberalism, um, you have to develop the ethos. It's the disposition, it's the character, it's the morality that you have to cultivate, which, I think of as the virtues. And it requires a lot of self-restraint, right? But it doesn't mean that you don't challenge or disagree or push back. You do, but you make sure that you don't tip over into ruthlessness, right? And
Hmm.
I think that's where the balance is. Um,
Yeah. Can you just say a little bit more, just so that our listeners are tracking here? What exactly do you mean by tempered liberalism, or what does Chernis in this book mean by tempered liberalism?
yeah. So by tempered liberalism, he means that you have to develop a sense of uh, discipline yourself, right? That if a great example is sort of Robespierre in during the French Revolution, and Robespierre was one who was against the monarchy. He challenged the status quo, um, and pushed back on a lot of things. But then he was the one who was responsible for the Reign of Terror, where a lot of people were executed because he wanted to see. He was so absolutist about his view that it had to be his way.
Hmm.
And so the idea of tempered liberalism is that no matter how strong your views are, you always have to have a sense of fallibilism, that you may not have the last word on what the truth is. And in the context where people disagree, you have to create room for disagreement, not shut it down. And that requires a lot of self-control. That requires a lot of the kind of moderation, right? That says not that you abandon your views at all, but you're not applying a kind of ruthlessness that is being applied. And so it's something that you cultivate. It's not even about the because I think across liberalism and classical liberalism there are many different flavors. It's not even about the ideas per se, but it's about how we show up, to these conversations, how we show up in these discussions, and that we really do have to develop the ethos, the temperament, if you will, to engage with one another. But it's not easy. It's difficult. Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sounds a little bit like, a commitment to principle
Hmm.
with while also maintaining an avoidance of extremes and
That's
a
right.
willingness to not what's the word I'm looking for, a sort of a militant and
Mhm.
orthodoxy about a
Yep.
particular principle, but a
For sure.
willingness to flexibly apply that
Hmm.
a principle in cases when it makes sense, but
For
also
sure.
apply other principles or be open to other points of view when
Hmm.
it makes sense.
For sure.
Which
For sure.
makes that's a nice image and a nice idea.
Yeah.
Um, well, Ben, this is great. I have one. So want to just ask you before we wrap up here.
Mhm.
Is there anything that you're excited about? What are you working on right now? Anything you'd like to share with listeners?
Well, it's I have one of the best jobs in the world. It's very exciting to work with a group of public intellectuals and scholars and students who also want to learn, getting ideas out there. Our goal is to continue to do that, right? I think that the world needs new ideas, fresh ideas. So we're just gonna continue to push on that. But I'm excited, as America gets into the year 250. It also happens to be the 250th anniversary of The Wealth of Nations, right? Which was published by Adam Smith, and certainly there are some connections there. And when I think about what America is, the concept of resilience comes to mind. I think America is resilient, but what makes America resilient is a kind of operating system that is embedded in America's DNA. It's about decentralization and federalism. It's about individual autonomy. It's about associational capacity, right? Seeing organizations emerge to address bottom-up issues. That's what makes America resilient. And to the extent that this operating system is being undermined, I want to really encourage a kind of a call to action for, scholars, public intellectuals, and leaders to really think about, what makes America resilient and to consider how we might study this, how we might encourage people to kind of go back to what makes America strong and robust and resilient. Resilience is the ability to absorb shocks, but to adapt, to innovate, and to bounce back in the face of challenges. And it's really remarkable that America is still, in some ways, a younger nation relative to other Western societies, but we've been very resilient, and I think that there's so much more ahead for us. But we need to go back to our roots and what I call the operating system, what makes America resilient. So that's one of the things I'm excited
Yeah.
about and excited about talking about and doing more on.
Cool. Well, yeah, that sounds really exciting, and I agree. Resilience is certainly the name of the game right now as
Hmm.
we navigate what many fear as a pivotal moment in our democracy of the coming
Hmm.
year. So thank you for
Yeah,
that.
sure thing.
Okay, last question. Anyone else
Yeah.
that you think I should talk to that is exploring interesting themes on these topics?
It's hard because there's so many people. I mean, doing amazing, phenomenal things. You mentioned Monica Guzman. I'm glad you're going to be talking to her. I definitely say Kurt Wayland. He's written a book called "Democracy's Resilience to Populist Threats." Really interesting work. Yuval Levin, for sure. His latest book is called "The American Covenant," and his previous book is called "A Time to Build." He's wonderful. Um, yeah, I'd say start there, but there are just so many others. Robert Talese, he's a philosopher at Vanderbilt. He wrote a book called Overdoing Democracy,
Okay.
Sustaining Democracy. That's the second one, and Civic Solitude. It's sort of a trilogy. You definitely want to talk to Robert Talisse. He's a just a phenomenal human being. So lots and lots of folks.
That's a good list. I got my homework cut out for me now for 2026. Well, Ben, it was a pleasure speaking with you. I really appreciate
Likewise.
your wisdom and perspective, and just a joy as always. So thank you for taking the time.
Thanks, Daniel. Thank you for inviting me.